Um, Real quickly, what happened in 1980? Right, that was Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was president in 1980. Reagan came in 81. What happened in 1980 that
Having a
precipitated
hiccup
all
in my
this change?
screen. I'm not sure if you are.
Yeah, John, have you? You know what?
Okay,
Actually,
now I'm
I'm
back.
sorry, John. You know what? Actually, before we get into that, so thank you, John. So I wanted to give people the opportunity to see your book and let people know where they can get in touch with you and how they can get your book.
So my book's available at all booksellers. So go get it, please. I was in litigation for about 16 years. I spent 6 years writing this book so that it would be understandable for the public the way I hope this lecture was understandable. And you can't really understand what's going on without this book. So buy the book, buy it wherever you buy it. My email address is pretty simple, John Abramson, MD John Abramson, MD at gmail.com. And if you have questions, let me know.
All right. So maybe I'm gonna have to ask all my questions through your email. So what happened in 1980 that precipitated all of the changes with regard to what basically what you were talking about?
Yeah, that's a really important question. What happened is that the right in the United States had been growing in power since Goldwater's dramatic defeat in '64. And the think tanks on the right went to work. I think probably analogous to Project 2025, but this was back then. And what they were looking at, and President Reagan came in, and there was a shift in the tax rates. So the maximum tax rate went from 90% way down to, I don't know, 30% or something. So the key issue that changed was the distribution of wealth in the United States. And that's bad for people's health. And the distribution, the maldistribution of wealth in the United States is greater than the maldistribution of wealth in the other developed countries. And it got worse in those years. That's the key. But for our purposes in healthcare, what happened is this private enterprise ethos took over the healthcare research part of creation of knowledge. And that's where the commercial entities could grab as much money as they could and make it look like it was based on scientific evidence.
Great, thank you for that. On slide 39, you were talking about that's the one we were talking about, like the 21.2% of responders were had a benefit compared to had a benefit compared to placebo, which had like around 10%.
Yeah.
Does that 21%, does that mean that out of 100 people, 20 or 21% felt it? Or I'm a little confused with what those numbers were.
Yeah, out of 100 people, 100 people with an acute migraine, 21.2% didn't have those symptoms at the end of 2 hours.
Okay. And then
21,
so you subtract out the 10% of the placebo effect and you're left with 10%. So that's the 1 in 10 number. Thank you
that's exactly right.
for clarifying. Do insurance companies invest in pharmaceutical companies either directly or indirectly? Are they allowed to?
That's a very good question. They don't. And one of the ways to break industry's lock on this is just to start making drugs effectively. California's getting into the insulin business. And this craziness of the $300 per vial insulin um, is going, the truth is, and now you're going to take the $300 vial and you're going to cap the cost at $35 a month for consumers. The truth is that it costs much less than $35 to make. So the government capping costs at $35 is just socializing that excess cost that's being paid. And California and others have are now acting on making their own insulin for $35 a vial. So there can be workarounds, but it's very hard. And the industry really has a grip on producing the products that doctors and people trust. And that grip's got to be loosened, but it won't be loosened until people understand these issues that we're talking about. The public has to understand. I mean, it's just like the demonstrations on Saturday. The public has to understand, except this is much more complex. It's much less visible than what's going on in politics. But the public has to understand this, and doctors have to understand this, and both parties have to demand that this be brought back to a common sense position where the American people's health is priority, not the profiteering.
So you had a slide where you went over Replax versus and you were talking previously about Ubrevely, I believe is how you
Yeah,
pronounce it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and you're basically showing how the Replax is more affordable and works better compared to the Ubrevely. Is there any site to your knowledge that shares that type of information so that people could go there and see a credible site to see
Yeah,
actually
yeah, yeah.
what
Yeah,
works?
so good. So this is the key question. This is the issue. What I showed you is the FDA approved label for both of those drugs. Go to FDA access data and put in Ubrelvy or the other drug, and you'll get the label. There's no more credible information than what the FDA includes in the drug label. Now, except credible has to be taken from 2 points of view. If you want to define credible as the most likely to be factually true, that's the FDA label. If you define credibly as the socially accepted definition of what's true, then that's what's in the journals and the marketing and the advertising. That's not credible. The FDA's label is credible. So if people say, holy moly, that's such a difference, and the cost is, it's so hugely different between the two drugs for each headache prevented. How can that possibly be true? The FDA label says that, and the fact is that the drug companies own their labels. They negotiate the labels with the FDA, but they own the label. Now, doctors aren't taught to look at those labels, but that's your quickest path to credible information is the drug label. The front page tells you what the indications are, and section 14 shows you the clinical trials that the company chose to put in the label. So don't think because you're reading that in a drug label and it's not the New England Journal of Medicine that it has less validity. It has way more validity. That's the source of information. But the meme and the sociology of this so-called knowledge is that you need to read it in the New England Journal, not the FDA approved label.
Thank you for that. All right. So, why does pharma have such control over the US, but as evidenced by the research in the country comparisons, as opposed to other countries? What is it about the United States that has allowed for this? And
I
what
think,
is it that prevents it in other countries, or at least minimizes it?
yeah, I think it's pretty clear that Citizens United changed everything. When companies can put unlimited amounts of money into political campaigns and threaten to put them into campaigns against legislators who don't support their agenda, it's powerful. I mean, that's how politicians work. They work on the contributions that come in. They attend to the people who pay for them to keep their position, and that's the primary difference. The other difference is a cultural difference where there's more of a sense of social cohesion and a commitment to the public's welfare as opposed to individual welfare in the other countries than there is in the United States. That makes us different. It makes us a powerful engine of innovation, but we need guardrails on that. We're out there alone. We're in a wild west of gloves off capitalism, and we need to have some guardrails, and we're going in the wrong direction.
So, who else is doing this kind of work?
Um, There are a lot of people who are doing this kind of work. I think if people want to see sources, a couple of sources that I would recommend is the Therapeutics Initiative. Yeah, is out of the University of British Columbia in Canada, and they do I think, the best uh, critical evaluation of publicly available knowledge. The Therapeutics Initiative, if you just Google them, and if they've covered the issue that you're interested in, you're going to get the best analysis of publicly available information. Public Citizen issues a book called uh, bad pills, bad pills. And that too is an excellent source of information.
What was the name of that organization?
Bad pills, I think it is. It's Public Citizen does the book.
Okay, thank you. And can you restate the difference? You're talking about what was it? Paxlovid, and you had two studies, and one was the HR and versus the SR. What can you kind of restate that real quickly? And we actually have like 2 minutes. You know what? Actually,
Sure.
before I ask you to do that, just because we are going to wrap up, and I have a feeling that your wrap up can be 2 minutes in and of itself. Do you want to end, take 2 minutes, and just kind of make a statement of what you think,
No,
what gives people help? How about
I'm
that?
sorry.
What gives people hope, or what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is what we're doing right now, is sharing this information and becoming realistically educated about the situation that's going on, and hoping that you folks who are watching this lecture have found it meaningful and will pass it on. The key is pass it on. Um, uh, Books like mine don't get support from the media. They don't get covered in book reviews. And this information is critically important. It's systematically canceled from the public consciousness. So please pass this information on and have those people pass it on. The Very quickly, the Paxlovid study. The first study included people who were unvaccinated and had no antibody evidence of ever having had COVID. So they were bare. And Paxlovid decreased serious illness by 90%. But when you do a study that has either people who are vaccinated or have antibodies or both, then there is not a significant benefit to Paxlovid. And
Got
the
it.
problem here is that 98% of people are either vaccinated or have antibody evidence of having COVID. So Paxlovid is only relevant for 2% of the people, but the drug ads don't say that. The drug ads make you think that you're being a jerk if you don't go get Paxlovid for $1,500 a pop, I may add.
Thank you for that clarification. So, all right, I'm going to try to get one more question in here, even though we have just a few seconds. With regard to the health outcomes in the United States and the shorter health span, is it because of the healthcare system, or is it because we're already starting off sick? Well, let's say that the food system is so bad in the United States, and that we're coming into the healthcare system obese and sicker.
Yeah, that's an extremely important question. It's not really coming into the healthcare system, are in the healthcare system obese and sick. And that is true. The point, and this is, I'm glad we can end on this, because the point here is that it is the healthcare system's responsibility to address those upstream problems. So we ignore it. We ignore the dependence on highly processed food. And we ignore the lack of exercise that people get. Um, Other countries can focus on those things as health issues. That's why I spent so much time on that slide that compared health spending to social service spending. It's our whole society, but healthcare can't be just isolated and say, no, 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 we just deal with prescribing things and doing surgery on people. That's the problem, is that the docs are taught that in medical school, and they're not taught that their responsibility is the well-being of the population. That's the key point.
Great. Thank you for that. And that ends our time, unfortunately. Well, thank you so much for all the information that you shared. I'm excited to talk to you again on Friday. I'm hoping your lecture isn't quite as long so I can get some more questions in because I have so many questions. But do what you got to do. It's such great information. And as we can unmute the audience so they can share their appreciation for Dr. Abramson, please.
Thank you so much. Amazing information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing.